going on this date, and I'm gonna let this gentleman give me the business.
Why are you telling me this?
Because I know it bothers you.
This is How I Met Your Dad, not to be confused with the 2022 television series How I Met Your Father. Nearly a decade before Hulu launched Hilary Duff's spin-off, Fox had tried breathing life into a completely different spin-off that never made it past the pilot episode. The failure wasn't only due to How I Met Your Mother's poorly received finale, but rather due to the fact that How I Met Your Dad falls for the same trap that so many sitcom spin-offs fall for time and time again.
Same thing, same time, same
What are either of you? What's happening inside of the room?
In 2014, the only sitcoms that were really hitting their stride were Modern Family and the remarkably consistent New Girl. Shows like Parks and Rec and How I Met Your Mother were preparing for their respective series finales. During these moments, networks have big shoes and even bigger advertising coffers to fill, which brings us to a moment in the entertainment industry known as pilot season. When it comes to greenlighting a sitcom, television studios can be relatively risk-averse. The simpler it is to explain your concept, the easier it is for studio executives to understand where it might fit into their content rotation. How I Met Your Mother was one of the most successful sitcoms on CBS's rotation. Creating a spin-off series likely seemed like a simple pathway to maintain a similar revenue stream. Hey, remember all that money we made with How I Met Your Mother? Let's do the same thing again.
Sweet, sweet $5, you're finally mine.
How I Met Your Dad should have been a slam dunk. The writing team of Craig Thomas and Carter Bays were returning from How I Met Your Mother, and they also brought on SNL alum Emily Spivey to help pen the script. The show features an attractive, charismatic cast and touches on some progressive themes. Writer and indie film darling Greta Gerwig was cast to play the show's central protagonist, Sally, with Meg Ryan providing the vocal talent for her older future self.
I've dusted off this typewriter to tell you the story of How I Met Your Dad.
Workaholics Anders Holm plays her ex-husband Gavin, and the show would have introduced us to an at-the-time unknown Drew Tarver and Andrew Santino. On paper, this feels like that right show, right time recipe that networks search tirelessly for with little to no avail. However, just because something looks good doesn't mean it's going to taste good.
You're gonna love it. Take a sip.
A Chardonnay. Todd, you're a professional chef.
The pilot episode of How I Met Your Dad is messy, to say the least. It feels completely rushed and comes off as if someone filmed an unedited rough draft of a screenplay rather than a fully conceptualized television show. While there are definitely a few charming moments peppered in throughout the episode's 22-minute runtime, the jokes feel largely flat, and the emotional core of the story is almost non-existent. The first 5 minutes of the show are like someone trying incredibly hard to get someone to like them despite their glaring red flags present the moment they walk into a room. If we compare this completely over-the-top scene to the first time we see McLaren's pub in How I Met Your Mother, we can see a stark contrast in how these locations are set up. McLaren's is introduced to us during a humorous and heartfelt conversation between Barney Stinson and Ted Mosby.
Ted, I'm gonna teach you how to live. Barney, we met at the urinal.
Oh, right.
This conversation sets up these characters in a grounded way, and the scene relies on the emotions and relationships to drive the comedy. The opening scene of How I Met Your Dad doesn't achieve any of this. It fails to tell us who these characters are to each other, why we should care about these characters, and most importantly, it fails to create characters that feel like real human beings. There is nothing endearing about disrupting a bar with a bullhorn for no reason other than having found a bullhorn. On top of that, what 20-something can afford to buy a bar that has reached maximum occupancy a round of shots? The writers spend almost zero time introducing us to this new cast or telling us why we should care, and instead jump straight into these zany antics that haven't been earned in any way, shape, or form. Take, for instance, this ringtone bit at the top of the show.
This is my favorite song. It's set to ringtone called xylophone.
This is clearly inserted as one of the catchphrase bits that became so popular with How I Met Your Mother.
Audience, say it with me. Legendary!
These bits and catchphrases almost always serve to deepen the pre-existing character traits present in who we are observing on screen. The issue How I Met Your Dad runs into is that it seems to use these tropes to define their characters without doing any of the necessary developmental labor to actually make them feel real. Greta Gerwig's character didn't resonate with test audiences. In an interview with Stephen Colbert, she revealed that during one test screening, the audience was given a knob to turn to the right when they liked something and the left when they didn't like something.
Apparently, they turned the knob to the left every time I came on.
Oh, no.
Rather than set up the series with Sally dealing with the insurmountable hardship that is ending a marriage to get us to care for and connect with her, the pilot essentially centers around her going out and finding a random guy to sleep with. That's not what most human beings would actually do, so as this episode continues down this unrelatable rabbit hole, we actively become further separated from our protagonist. It's hard to connect with a character when they are constantly making objectively terrible decisions.
We're supposed to sleep together tonight.
Oh, God.
What do you mean, oh God?
At the end of the day, it seems like these veteran writers who created an absolute sitcom juggernaut phoned in this pilot. As time goes on, the writers get further and further away from taking that necessary first step, which is building a lasting foundation for the show to structure itself around. The best example of how it feels to watch the pilot of How I Met Your Dad comes at the end of the episode, where this new crew of characters all barge into Sally's apartment, shouting different reasons for Sally to care about something.
Marriage is beautiful. You'll always have someone to go to bed with. Check into your bathroom sinks. You're not going to die alone. Sharing a life.
You don't have to share towels.
It's a cacophony of catchphrases and shtick, telling us to care about something when we aren't even sure what it is yet. This is exactly what it feels like the showrunners would be doing in our living rooms if this show made it to air. On top of all that, the pilot ends by telling us exactly who the dad on How I Met Your Dad is. This effectively eliminates the primary writing convention and mystery that made How I Met Your Mother successful in the first place. CBS also took issue with the pilot, perhaps for the same reasons we've outlined today. However, they saw potential in the IP and wanted to retool the concept. Bays and Thomas would only reshoot if they got a series order commitment. When that never happened, the project fizzled. Tweets from 2013 show that the creators wanted this spin-off to stand completely separate from the original run. This is not the case for the new Hulu endeavor, with cameos, Easter eggs, and locations crossing over. Was this familiar ingredient what finally got the show out of production limbo?
That's a pretty weird challenge.
If there's one thing you should know about me, it's that I love a weird challenge.
Characters don't need shtick. They need depth. They need to feel relatable, to feel real. For those things to happen, they need to behave in ways that normal human beings behave. You can't have jokes without substance. You can't create comedy without relatability. If we can't connect ourselves to a character on an emotional level, we can never go along for the ride later on.
Wait, before we go, I gotta go find a guy to carry my bags.
Oh, I see him. Just make a right at the telephone booth, a left into the bathroom, look in the mirror, and you found him.
No, you didn't land in an alternate universe. This isn't the Mandela effect at work, and you aren't misremembering the plot of an iconic 90s TV show. This is The Big House, a family sitcom where a fictionalized version of Kevin Hart moves from a wealthy area of California to Philadelphia to live with his working class aunt and uncle. In other words, the plot of The Fresh Prince got flipped, turned upside down. And we'd like to take a minute, just sit right there. We'll tell you how Kevin Hart got to parody Bel-Air.
I'm not used to the cold weather yet. You mind if I shut this window?
Actually, if that window gets shut, the carbon monoxide from the water heater will kill us, so I like to leave it open.
In the early 2000s, Kevin Hart had only just started his comedy career. He'd found himself a couple of bit parts in Scary Movie 3 and Along Came Polly, and he even appeared on a few episodes of Judd Apatow's short-lived series Undeclared. But he had yet to star in anything or make a big splash regarding his celebrity status. Little did the 25-year-old fledgling comedian know he was about to receive his big break, his very own TV show. After the 80s and 90s TV bubble had popped, ABC was looking to revitalize its once popular TGIF programming block. It needed a sharp and relatable tentpole to bolster ratings, and the best way to do that was with young, fresh talent like Hart.
You're a genius, thanks, man.
Don't thank me, thank us.
Behind the camera, ABC had roped in one of the top creative minds they could find to build the show from the ground up. That mind was David Zuckerman, who was best known at the time for developing Family Guy with Seth MacFarlane and, oh yeah, writing and producing The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air between 1993 and 1995. Fresh Prince ended its run in 1996 but remained popular in the 2000s through reruns on ABC's competitor network, NBC.
Hey, who turned out the lights?
Zuckerman and Hart looked at the success of the show and apparently thought they could replicate it. Literally. With Zuckerman's insider knowledge, they copied the Will Smith vehicle and came up with a parody of a winning formula to show to ABC. We've got a young actor playing a fictionalized version of himself bound for college, a fish out of water premise, an all-black cast, a comedic relief cousin, and the juxtaposition between wealthy and poor upbringings. Hart even insisted the show was loosely based on his own life, coming back home to Philadelphia after living in LA, similar to how The Fresh Prince was based on the life of record executive Benny Medina. Despite Hart's insistence that the story was in any way unique to him, The Big House was an imitation. There was no way around that simple fact, and it really should have been a selling point. After all, The Fresh Prince is an iconic piece of pop culture history. Putting a comedian at the helm of its parody was a golden idea. Unfortunately, that golden idea could have used a little more polish. Between non-committal network executives, heartbreaking behind-the-scenes treatment, and the actual content of the show, Hart's big break almost broke him.
Maybe this is all my fault, all right? But you guys gotta understand, I'm not used to somebody telling me what I can and cannot do.
In 2003, ABC decided to pick up The Big House and even flew Hart out to present the show to the media and potential advertisers. But in a dramatic twist worthy of its own TV spotlight, as he was about to go on stage, Hart received some troubling news. In his own words, during a 60 Minutes interview,
they just said they're not going to go through or pick it up. Somebody should be back here to talk to you shortly. What does that mean?
And so, just like that, Hart's aspirations of stardom were crushed until ABC's executives changed their mind. They called him up, apologized, and asked if he'd like to start filming The Big House as a mid-season replacement in the spring of 2004. After presumably recovering from the whiplash, Hart agreed, and filming for The Big House was underway shortly after. Since it also didn't have the luxury of a catchy exposition-laden theme song, The Big House's pilot has an inexperienced Kevin Hart dump his entire backstory on us in the opening few seconds of the episode. It's a rough start that doesn't get any smoother, as each minute of runtime introduces us to a new tired trope or uncomfortable stereotype.
All of a sudden, you seem fun. Can I come live with you?
Your mileage may vary on Hart's performance as the privileged rich kid, but the weight of the show wasn't entirely on his shoulders. Bonafide movie star Keith David, a pre-Community Yvette Nicole Brown, and comedian Faison Love all starred as various members of Kevin's family, and they all did their best with what little they were given. The problem is none of them were given very much. The pilot goes through all the expected motions, introducing Hart to his humble new home, reminding him that he doesn't have the same amenities as he used to, instigating a familial dispute, and wrapping it all up with a big wholesome speech. Unsurprisingly, it's the mirror image of the Fresh Prince pilot. Reviews of the episode made it clear that the show had none of Fresh Prince's biting relevance, clever writing, and, ironically, none of its heart. Will Smith's portrayal of the streetwise kid from Philadelphia was instantly endearing because even when he stuck out, he was charming and effortlessly cool. He represented a level of wish fulfillment in the audience, who could live vicariously through his sudden step into the upper echelons of society.
Steve, David, Henry, this is Will, my nephew by marriage.
Kevin, on the other hand, has to move in the opposite direction. The showrunners didn't seem to have a destination in mind. The obvious way to make the most of the parody would be to turn Kevin into a Carlton archetype, making him a coddled, nerdy, and always upbeat kid who has to face the real world. Conversely, he could have been a rude and entitled rich kid who needs to be brought down to earth. Instead, he toes the line. He's not nerdy enough to be Carlton and not spoiled enough to be a typical rich kid. He's written and performed to be a naive yet nice young man who's also vaguely materialistic, but ultimately not that shaken up about his new reality. And that kills a lot of the dramatic potential of any future storylines. It doesn't help that many of the house sets they built are indistinguishable from every other moderately nice house that's ever existed in a sitcom. When Will arrives in Bel Air, he makes it clear that he's had a rough upbringing and that the bank's home feels like it's from another world. The most Kevin can muster in The Big House is a distaste for his basement bedroom.
I like what you did. The stains on the rug go nice with the stains on the couch.
It's a much less effective take on the wealth disparity that was such an important component of The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. And that's not the only place this parody falters. The other core aspect of The Fresh Prince is how it touches on Black culture. It's not like The Big House had to touch on serious social and political topics. It's just an ABC sitcom. But seemingly out of obligation, the pilot and the rest of the show's run threw in several ham-fisted lines about real issues. Issues The Fresh Prince addressed with way more nuance half a decade before. Parody parody without commentary is really just an uninspired ripoff, and ripoffs are decidedly less fun to watch. But that doesn't mean that Big House didn't have potential. With a few tweaks, the show could have hit its stride. Unfortunately, the show wouldn't get the chance to correct any of its early failings. ABC committed to 13 episodes of The Fresh Prince riff, but even that paltry episode count wouldn't come to fruition. On the first day of shooting their 6th episode, the cast was pulled into a meeting on the living room set and told their show had been canceled, and this would be the final week of work. No official reason was given for the abrupt cancellation, but the likeliest explanation is that the show was just not very good. It wasn't even supposed to make it to its premiere, but once again, ABC changed its mind at the last minute. The show's 6 episodes were allowed to air, but they never returned. No additional episodes were ever ordered, and it's been buried and forgotten ever since. This was a huge blow for Hart, though it wasn't all bad. In a post on his official Facebook page back in 2018, Hart spoke about his time on The Big House and told his fans, 14 years later, I stand where I stand, and I'm so proud of what I accomplished. Don't let failure stop you, people. Use failure as ammunition to gain success. It only makes you stronger. And for better or worse, he's right. Hart has built a thriving career off the back of a failure that could have ruined any chance he had at a future in Hollywood. He fought through the endless back and forth with ABC and came out a winner in the long run. Now, if he only hadn't done Borderlands, then this video could have gone out on a real high note.
Goddamn. Feels good to be back. Let's celebrate.
How did Westworld go from this absolutely brilliant scene to a complete mess in just a few short seasons? Well, despite being one of the most impressive and critically acclaimed television series of the 2010s, a cacophony of poor narrative decisions, shifting corporate interests, and a few freak accidents caused it all to come crashing down.
The passage from one world to the next requires bold steps, Bernard.
Today, the original Westworld, its sequel Future World, or the long-forgotten TV series Beyond Westworld are not remembered as the high watermark of 70s cinematic achievement.
Oh.
However, it has a stalwart fan base of loyalists who love the franchise's dystopian edge, proto-cyberpunk aesthetics, and Yul Brynner's stoic Terminator-esque performance. Yet, after the franchise ran aground in 1980, after only 3 episodes of Beyond Westworld hit the airwaves, it proved rather difficult to get anyone at Warner Brothers to give the property any real attention. Then, in 2011, after a turnover of the studio's executives, the studio's interest in seriously pursuing the project began to manifest in earnest. Producer Jerry Weintraub, mostly known for the Ocean's 11 films, took on the project to 2 people, the husband and wife writing team Jonathan Nolan and Lisa Joy, who would breathe fresh life into creator Michael Crichton's idea of an Old West-themed pleasure park populated by robots. Nolan and Joy concocted a take on the material that was simultaneously attempting to be high art and commercial. The first season of the show would have a driving mystery about the iconic man in black, now played by Ed Harris, stalking through the Westworld park attempting to solve the riddle of the maze. Evan Rachel Wood's Dolores, Jeffrey Wright's Bernard, and Thandie Newton's Maeve are all trapped in various kinds of mazes, many of which relate to the nature of consciousness and the inherent right that all sentient beings have of self-determination and free will.
We can't define consciousness because consciousness does not exist.
Crichton's original idea of a theme park where the mega-wealthy go to spend time reveling in the pleasures of the past had been taken and evolved to another level. The true genius of the first season of Westworld is that it's a self-contained story with a beginning, middle, and an end. The central mystery of the maze is tied into multiple characters' arcs and the ultimate twist. Spoilers if you haven't seen Westworld, but at the conclusion of the story, William and the Man in Black are revealed to be the same character, and that half of the show we've been watching has been secretly told in flashbacks to a timeline transpiring 30 years prior. The show was a smash hit. It was ranked on every critic's best of year-end lists, and it proved to be an exceedingly valuable asset for HBO, being nominated for multiple awards. In fact, some commentators speculated that when Game of Thrones inevitably concluded, perhaps Westworld would take over as HBO's #1 show. Tragically, that was not to be. Season 2 of the series was not as well received. The show was in something of a hard spot, narratively speaking. Everyone loved the twist of multiple timelines and expected some sort of formalist element to be incorporated into the new season, but Nolan and Joy obviously couldn't pull off a big reveal in the same way. So they opted to have 2 parallel timelines starring Bernard play out simultaneously, not attempting to hide this structural gimmick, but instead lean into it. The only problem being that it's just plain confusing. In Season 1, when the narrative jumps back and forth between the 2 timelines, there are no location or time graphics displayed on screen to make sure the audience is following along appropriately, because on first viewing, you're literally not supposed to know there are 2 timelines.
Ah yes, your mysterious backstory.
To complicate things even further, while Season 1 had the mystery of the maze, Season 2 had multiple quests and mysteries. The Forge, the Door, and the Valley Beyond. That's just too many narrative devices to have our characters attempting to understand or reckon with. As the series rolled out, many critics and viewers felt that the show had lost its way. It just failed to exceed the massive promise of the initial season. After the conclusion of the second season, the show undergoes a soft reboot. The scale completely shifts, and the show becomes ostensibly a fully future-set cyberpunk dystopia. The third season follows Dolores on her mission outside of Westworld as she attempts to stop an evil corporation who is using a hyper-intelligent algorithm, codenamed Rehoboam, which had perfected a mathematical equation that could accurately predict the trajectory of humans' lives. This has effectively restructured society, creating massive wealth and education inequality. The head of this company, played by Vincent Cassel, is a man named Serac, who has effectively used Rehoboam to become the most powerful and influential figure in human history. The season sees the addition of many new characters, most notably Caleb Nichols, played by Aaron Paul, as well as resurrecting many previously killed-off characters as host clones under the control of Dolores. Some fans felt this course correction from a genre and stylistic perspective was too jarring. Why is the show called Westworld if we're just fully in the future battling essentially Skynet? Sure, the show has inverted the themes of free will and sentience.
You still don't even understand who you are. If any of this was your choice.
But many viewers felt that the shift was too drastic. You've got to give it up for Jonathan Nolan and Lisa Joy though. They fully went for it. They took HBO's money and all the audience goodwill they gained from season 1 of the show and tried to make something wholly unique. But here's the question. Was this massive shift because in November of 2018, many of the sets located on Paramount Ranch were destroyed by the Woolsey fire? That's not exactly clear, but it does seem likely. So, season 4 is around the corner. Nolan and Joy probably got their act together and pivoted back to the Western thing in order to try and reclaim the highs of season 1, right? Wrong. They doubled down on the future science fiction setting. Season 4 of the show is a complex web of narratives that center around the host, Charlotte, who is now using bioengineered flies to mind control humanity and forcing them to live on predetermined loops of behavior. We follow Caleb, Bernard, and Maeve as they attempt to undo this newly distinctly bleak status quo, struggling for both their own free will, but also the free will of humanity itself. This season crescendos into Dolores, who's been living without her memories for most of the season, being given back her identity and setting up a new fresh start for everyone in newly restarted versions of Westworld, inside the Sublime.
Hale didn't design Maya and Peter and all the others that kept me company in my world. I did it.
Does that sound hard to follow? Well, that's what a lot of viewers felt as well. Or rather, the viewers that actually showed up. When Season 4 of Westworld debuted, it did not launch with favorable ratings. Season 1's premiere nabbed the very impressive 12 million viewers. The Season 4 premiere, only approximately 4 million people tuned in. Westworld's convoluted narrative finally proved too much to sustain. That's how you get HBO canceling one of their flagship titles after only a few years. It's rumored that the first season cost roughly $100 million to produce. With production budgets in that ballpark, viewership in the 4 millions just isn't going to cut it for the mega prestige play that HBO was looking for. Nolan and Joy are quoted in a Hollywood Reporter piece about the cancellation saying, "We've been privileged to tell these stories about the future of consciousness, both human and beyond, in the brief window of a time before our AI overlords forbids us from doing so." Part of that sentiment rings true, and part of it seems deeply unappreciative of the fact they were allowed to paint on the largest canvas in the history of mankind with relatively few restrictions. Westworld's rapid decline away from cultural centrality is just one more bellwether of the rapid approaching heat death of monoculture. HBO was founded on these types of big brassy ideas, shows that have a point of view and a perspective, and could pull people in thanks to their memorable characters. But you can't fight the coming of the dawn. There's more content being produced now more than ever. Culture is fractured and people are seeking out ever increasingly smaller niches to delve into. Westworld failing is equal parts Nolan and Joy not being able to avoid a sophomore slump, changing cultural tastes, and also the simple fact that in the streaming wars, we all lose.
We're just gonna take a minute, and we're all gonna come up with a new plan.
You don't know what you're doing.
Really, I know exactly what I'm doing.
In the mid-2010s, Universal dusted off the proverbial coffin of their most beloved franchise, the Universal Monsters. The powers that be decided to resurrect them with an all-star cast of actors and directors tasked with the mission of creating a cinematic universe to compete with Marvel. And yet, for everyone involved, this monstrous resurrection only had disastrous results. These three men were propelled to
superstardom by the Universal Monster movies. And that's exactly the formula that Universal was hoping to mimic with their new Dark Universe. Attach major stars to these iconic characters and let the money roll in.
That's your plan?
In May of 2017, Universal made a splashy announcement. A press release coupled with a publicity shot of Johnny Depp, Javier Bardem, Tom Cruise, Russell Crowe, and Sofia Boutella announcing the arrival of the next big cinematic event, the Dark Universe. The announcement also heralded the involvement of a murderer's row of behind-the-camera talent. Chris Morgan, the writer and producer behind the Fast and the Furious franchise, Alex Kurtzman, head honcho of Star Trek and Transformers, and Tom Cruise collaborators Christopher McQuarrie and David Koepp, among others, were all named. After flirting with doing something with the monsters for a long time, Universal was finally putting their money on the table. The only holdup was that this wasn't the first time they tried to do this with the classic monsters. Going all the way back to the beginning, what eventually became the Universal Monsters initially were just desperate adaptations of beloved horror novels. Todd Browning's Dracula, released in 1931, was the first, and often considered the best of these films.
I am Dracula.
But in rapid succession, James Whale made Frankenstein, The Invisible Man, and Bride of Frankenstein, which opened the gateway for The Wolfman and a bevy of sequels. And these sequels formed the first interconnected cinematic universe on film.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
Each of the central characters of the Universal horror films got their own franchises, and as time went on, they got more self-involved, myopic, and needlessly complex. The final installments in the Universal Monsters Collective franchise were dubbed Monster Rally films, largely because they were light on plot and heavy on cameos of the beloved characters that went bump in the night. But the more Universal returned to the well, the less money the films made. We're going to take a quick break from talking about Dark Universe to talk about another universe that you should check out. And that's Bloodline: Heroes of Lythus, one of my current favorite fantasy RPG games. First off, Bloodline is stunning. Check out these 3D realistic graphics. It's also very customizable, which is something I value in RPGs. You can customize your champions by marrying different bloodlines until you find a unique combination of abilities that fits your own gameplay style. The controls are easy to use, and it's free to play for both Android and iOS. The characters are also totally epic, and if you use my link, you can get the Clan of Karg for free. These guys can transform into real dragons. You can also use my link to get a half-dragonborn, half-demigod hybrid heir for free. And these are extremely rare. So use my link in the description or scan the QR code showing on screen and download and try out Bloodline for free. My link also includes a $20 exclusive starter pack with 20 intimacy packs, 100,000 gold, and 100 diamonds. New legends will be born, and now, back to the video. There were various attempts at reclaiming the glory of Universal throughout the years, from Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula,
Welcome to my home.
to that one Frankenstein movie that starred Robert De Niro. However, they never fully attempted to mimic the interconnectedness of the original Universal monster films. In 2014, Universal made their first play to recreate the interconnected filmic world. Dracula Untold was a mashup of classic Dracula iconography and Batman Begins. Originally intended as just a Dracula project that would update the character for contemporary audiences, the film was altered just 2 weeks before it was released. Reshoots retroactively pulled the character into a connective film universe with the other horror stalwart icons of dread that Universal was preparing to launch.
I'm Mina.
Vlad.
However, despite a new ending scene that showed Dracula in modern day and set up a new conflict, audiences did not respond to the film. That, coupled with a low box office return due in part to the fact that the film's release date was shifted 3 different times, caused Universal to step back and reevaluate. The failure of Dracula Untold sparked the need to publicly signal that Universal was going to double down on the idea of a modern horror universe. That's when they brought in the previously mentioned list of megastars, writers, and directors. Javier Bardem was set to star in a reboot of Bride of Frankenstein, opposite Angelina Jolie as the bride. Johnny Depp would be the Invisible Man, Russell Crowe would appear as Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and act as a sort of Nick Fury for the film universe.
What do you think you're doing? Evacuate your men. We'll take it from here.
And Tom Cruise would star as an adventurer and Indiana Jones-esque character for The Mummy. You'd think you'd want Frankenstein or Dracula, the 2 most iconic characters Universal had, to be the big debut. But with Dracula Untold being a misfire, Universal opted for The Mummy, largely due to the fact that the Brendan Fraser franchise had a largely positive cultural opinion. The Mummy reboot had been kicking around for close to a decade. The version that was released follows Nick Morton, a U.S. Army sergeant who makes money on the side stealing priceless items from archaeological dig sites and selling them on the black market.
Let me tell you, we are not looters. We are liberators of precious antiquities. Right.
He, along with his comedic sidekick Chris Vail, played by Jake Johnson, are quickly swept up in a would-be modern tale of adventure, horror, and intrigue. While this film isn't directly based on any one specific version of The Mummy, arguably to its detriment, the film attempts to fuse the best of the Stephen Sommers Mummy with the best of the MCU. The film chronicles Morton's unwitting revival of the purportedly evil entombed entity and his embodiment of an ages-old curse put upon him by the titular villain. Morton, a character with compromised morals to begin with, is tempted by the mummy to be a vessel for her abilities and desires.
You have been selected as the vessel for the ultimate evil, and we are the only ones who can rectify that.
The end product wants to be a modern-day adventure classic, but just kind of lands somewhere in an uncanny valley between genuinely boring and just straight-up copying elements from other films that were more successful. The film also works really hard to signal to the audience that it's setting up the building blocks of a universe to come. Russell Crowe's Dr. Jekyll heads an organization dubbed Prodigium.
From the Latin, monstrum vel prodigium.
It acts as a spooky version of S.H.I.E.L.D., but the film takes all this so seriously. It just sucks the fun out of it. None of the world-building ideas ever develop into anything substantial, leaving much of the film feeling like the cold vestiges of boardroom business decisions. The weirdest aspect of the movie is how it's so blatantly attempting to copy the MCU's trademark humor, and failing miserably. Tom Cruise is the leading man. He's arguably the last true movie star. He's also not funny. Sure, Les Grossman was great, but Tom Cruise is just not funny in this movie.
What are you thinking? I'm thinking we're probably gonna die here.
And tragically, audiences agree. On its release, the film pulled in $32 million for a full theatrical haul of $410 million worldwide. This was a disappointment to Universal, but it was truly the critical reaction to The Mummy that sank the dark universe. The film garnered a 15% on Rotten Tomatoes, with audiences collectively seeming to say, "We see what you're doing and we don't like it." It was even nominated for the Worst Picture for the Razzies that year, alongside Worst Director and dual Worst Actor nominees for Tom Cruise and Russell Crowe.
I'm offering you a partnership. You, evil incarnate. Me, your good friend Eddie Hyde.
So what happened? Why did the film end up being such a swing and a miss? Well, one major contributing factor was revealed in a June 2017 Variety article. Tom Cruise ostensibly took over the picture. According to insider sources who spoke with the writers, Cruise joined the production just after Kurtzman was brought on board. But he was contractually guaranteed control of the picture. He then set about micromanaging every aspect of the production. He brought two of his longtime collaborators in to rewrite the script, and during the shooting of the film, would consistently lobby for less screen time for Sofia Boutella's Mummy and more screen time for his character. He also was the driving force behind the fact that Nick Morton was cursed, and ostensibly took over the role of the Mummy at the end of the film. Cruise was brought in by Universal to give the project a cultural prestige value. However, they made a deal with him that granted him control to the degree that probably wasn't wise in hindsight. Multiple sources say that Cruise was seen telling Kurtzman what types of lenses to use on the camera and how to direct scenes, to say nothing to the fact that he brought in his longtime editor to cut the finished product. Supervising art director for the project, Frank Walsh, said, "This is very much a film of two halves, before Tom and after Tom. You don't have to be a psychologist to read between the lines there."
Stop.
A sacrifice?
Just stop.
For the greater good.
I'm not interested in that at all.
Since then, Kurtzman has since moved on and is very successfully running Paramount's entire Star Trek organization. However, when asked about The Mummy recently, he just said, "The Mummy wasn't what I wanted it to be." Needless to say, its disastrous critical reception, tepid box office numbers, and generally below average interest from potential fans sealed the fate of the Dark Universe. There were brief rumors about Channing Tatum taking the role of Van Helsing and The Rock being courted to play the Wolfman, but the reaction to The Mummy sealed the deal. There weren't going to be any more films in the Dark Universe. It was dead. No Bride of Frankenstein, no Invisible Man, no more Prodigium. It was just over.
Wow, that was intense.
And that was that, until Universal partnered with Blumhouse and made a fantastic standalone Invisible Man movie a few years later that has no connection to any shared universe. But, you know, where there's a will, there's a way. But that's far from the last time we'll see the monsters. Currently on the horizon, there's a Wolfman film purportedly starring Ryan Gosling, proving that the Universal monsters do one thing better than anyone else in the history of film: come back from the dead.
Schofield, I don't know what you did, but Abruzzi wanted me to give you this PI card. Congratulations. You just joined the ranks of the employed.
When the first season of Prison Break burst onto our television screens, it felt like an event. In a landscape of mysterious dramas like Lost and beat-by-beat procedurals such as 24, Prison Break stood out. Armed with its catchy premise, the action-packed heist series was guided by a simple mission statement, and what seemed to be, at the time, a predetermined natural conclusion. You know, a prison break.
I'm getting you out of here. It's impossible.
While the debut run certainly met those expectations, it was inevitable that such a simple premise could be dragged out for occasional highs and all too frequent lows. Because over the course of 12 years, the core concept of Prison Break degenerated into a series of numbing character deaths, ridiculous revivals, and outright boring repeats.
Take your time. You got 15 minutes to get over that wall.
But before Prison Break jumped the shark one too many times, the Fox network had a massive hit on their hands. Debuting in 2005, the show was seen by millions of viewers, most likely due to its pilot directed by Hollywood action alum Brett Ratner, and a truly irresistible title. An instant favorite, Prison Break was the first Fox show to dominate Monday night television in nearly a decade. In fact, its early success led the studio to extend the first season by 9 episodes.
Gotcha. You talking out the side of your neck.
From the jump, Michael Scofield sits calmly in a tattoo studio. Played by Wentworth Miller, the man is intense but oddly serene as the artist works. When she's finished, the tattoo artist admits that their months-long sessions are impressive. Because rather than a cliched selection from a flash sheet, Michael Scofield's first tattoo is suggested to be something bigger.
You've seen the blueprints. Better than that. I've got them on me.
In one of the most effective scene jumps in TV history, Prison Break quickly jolts us directly into a bank robbery. As cool and collected as he was under the tattoo needle, Michael instead waits for the approaching sirens. Upon landing in the jailhouse, an actual Illinois penitentiary which had closed just a few years before production, Michael gets down to business. After reuniting with his brother Lincoln, played by Dominic Purcell, it is revealed that the older sibling is indeed on death row for a political assassination. Convinced of his brother's innocence, Michael reveals his plan to break him out of Fox River. When Lincoln logically states that busting out is impossible, Michael offers a chilling reply.
Not if you design the place, it isn't.
And here's where we, the audiences, begin to fall into the Prison Break trance. As Michael goes through the motions of prison life, we catch glimpses of faces and scenarios harkening back to his elaborate apartment documents. From faking diabetes to make good with the governor's daughter/prison doc, to assembling a bona fide heist team, Prison Break's best moments are the planning stages. In fact, when Michael finally shows off his full body tattoo to his stunned brother, the ensuing sequence might just be the pinnacle of the series. Even though Prison Break's pilot tore through the collective conscious, Fox executives originally didn't think its story was meant for television at all. Passing on the script a few years before its eventual development, network heads felt that Prison Break's premise was more suited for the silver screen.
You're not gonna last a second in this place unless I do something about it.
A long-form, twist-filled narrative with a decidedly conclusive outcome sounded more like a summer thriller to the Suits. But after serialized dramas like Lost came to prominence, the show received the green light. Perhaps perceptive to the very nature of Prison Break, this feels like a studio note that shouldn't have been skipped over. Prison Break ultimately made good on its title in the first season's breakneck finale. Michael and Lincoln do indeed escape Fox River with several friends and foes in tow. In a truly satisfying hybrid of heist teams and prison exploitation flicks, it appeared as if the ragtag gang of innocent victims and legit psychopaths might make it out in style. But unlike their fallen comrade D.B. Cooper, the Fox River 8 couldn't catch a sky ride and instead fled on foot. As a perfect setup for more action, fans correctly assumed that they were in for another season, and that is exactly where the trouble starts with Prison Break. Because when you push a potent concept past its shelf life, the only possible outcome is for fans to watch their favorite show slowly sink.
I want you to promise me that you're gonna keep an eye on Link. As you may have noticed, he has a tendency to get in trouble.
Unfortunately, that's exactly what happened when Prison Break made its semi-triumphant return the following summer. Another ratings hit for Fox. Season 2 feels both married to the story beats of Season 1, while also totally separate from its focused beginnings. Now centered on the lives and many, many deaths of its central cast post-escape, Prison Break tried to up the ante without the confinement of prison walls, both physically and narratively. Dubbed The Fugitive x8 by showrunner Paul Shearing, the second season of Prison Break is really more like a comic book multiverse where basically everyone dies, only to be revived somewhere convenient down the line. Though the second season mostly takes place outside of prison, the show's desire to repeat itself is unrelenting. Case in point, series mainstay and central bad guy Teabag famously lost his hand in a gory, badass finale of Season 1. In Season 2, Teabag gets his hand reattached by a backroom surgeon, only to cut it off again.
When you call a piece of white trash who couldn't pass the cop's exam and now makes less than a mailman. A CO.
Likewise, previously murderous characters like Agent Kellerman seem to become valiant heroes anytime there's a convenient chance for a new character arc. Characters like Kellerman are killed off-screen en masse in Season 2, further reminding viewers that they will probably return at some point. While the showrunners claimed executing central characters established a gritty reality, it quickly loses all shock value. Attempting to establish bigger stakes, the third outing focuses on a prison where, get this, the prisoners are the guards. While certainly novel in its approach to the prisoner exploitation genre, Season 3's convoluted plot overshadows interesting sets and fight scenes. Not content to only copy itself, Prison Break Season 3 cribs from everyone. In one particularly pointless execution, Lincoln is given a box which potentially contains the head of his brother's lover. Sound familiar? Unlike the stark brutality of Seven's What's in the Box scene, Prison Break straight up opens the box, shows you the head, and asks you to accept that a character actually died, for real this time.
She's dead, Michael.
By the time Prison Break's fourth and intended final season rolled around, some were relieved that the troubled series might find suitable closure. But as the episodes wore on, many realized they were in for another messy year. With more backstabbing and character reversals than ever before, Michael and Lincoln are put at odds for the first time when one of them turns cop. But after crying wolf for the last few years, no one actually believed the brothers had turned against each other. Even more implausible are the constant self-sacrifice scenes that had continued to mar the series. Once the brothers are safely back in each other's good graces, the series ends with another time jump to end all time jumps. Now, several years in the future, Lincoln and the fam are seen visiting Michael's grave. While the show had attempted to set up this scenario with a mid-season brain cancer plot, the ending came out of the blue. Fortunately for those in need of info dumps, Prison Break provided a made-for-TV film to cap things off in 2009. Filmed in tandem with Season 4, this under 90-minute special is technically 2 episodes tied together. Showcasing the events leading up to Michael's death, the hilariously named Prison Break: The Final Break operates as just another retread. While many assumed this was the end for Prison Break, Fox had other plans. Almost a decade after the series ended, the show was revived for a 5th season. Perhaps a reaction to other semi-successful legacy seasons like X-Files and Roswell, or maybe just because stars Wentworth Miller and Dominic Purcell couldn't seem to duck red carpet questions about more episodes, Prison Break returned in 2017.
You could have left me there. In jail. Could have or should have.
Saddled with an even sadder premise than ever before, the series asked audiences to accept the return of Michael Scofield. In what amounts to a hybrid of Season 3 and 4, this latest entry was a return to form in all the wrong ways. From Teabag's newer, crazier prosthetic hand to Michael's ridiculous explanation for why he faked his own death, the Prison Break revival was as tired as its reappearing characters. Although harsh ratings quickly killed the revamp, Season 5 was eventually known as one of the most illegally viewed shows of the year, an almost fitting achievement.
I did everything I could. I know you did.
While the sequel seasons and the film are tough pills to swallow, it's hard to imagine any other outcome for a series like Prison Break. Even though its dynamite cast and cool physical hooks do some heavy lifting, the central premise itself certainly carried all the weight from the beginning. Rather than bust loose from those shackles, Prison Break instead tried to blow up the past with more death, more redemption, and less returns. Adding new locations and higher stakes can drown out the fact that simplicity made the show a success, and expanding an already exciting location does little to justify repeating what audiences have already seen. Quite honestly, does anyone really need to bust out of jail more than once to tell a solid story?
Why you want to see Burroughs so bad anyhow?
Because he's my brother.
However, much like the odds stacked against Michael in the triumphant first season, Prison Break continues to garner appeals for more episodes. Perhaps the strength of the series' beginnings keep the faithful coming back. Or maybe those comfortable, cheesy plots and cartoonish character arcs are too good to resist. Because whether we like it or not, that Prison Break buzz has been brewing once again. Although both cast and crew claim there are no plans for more Prison Break, you never really know when the time might be right for another stay at Fox River State Pen. This is Paul Verhoeven's seminal 1987 classic, Robocop. And this is how everyone's favorite bipedal robotic juggernaut was handled in the remake.
Drop your weapon.
Needless to say, the film didn't treat old Detroit's favorite son much better. A production marred with false starts, studio intervention, and a revolving door of writers definitely isn't the ideal way to attempt a big-budget reimagining of one of cinema's most beloved icons.
Thank you for your cooperation.
The original Robocop was a searing critique of decaying social mores, corporate greed, and the weaponization and privatization of a police force. It was a takedown of the decade it was produced in, exploiting the hyper-violence and over-the-top excess of the time to lampoon the very culture that was spawning it. However, after 2 less-than-stellar sequels and 20 years of sporadic and weirdly low-budget attempts at TV show reboots,
See you in hell, Robocop!
it was decided by MGM they needed to stop screwing around and finally revive Robocop the right way, with a big-budget reimagining from an iconoclast director. In July of 2008, almost 15 years to the day after the failure of Robocop 3 sent the franchise into a tailspin, Darren Aronofsky signed on to helm a remake of Verhoeven's classic film. MGM had been working on this remake for close to 3 years at this point, and a heavyweight director was what they needed to give the project some real momentum. David Self, screenwriter of The Wolfman and Road to Perdition, was signed on to write the script. At the time, Aronofsky is quoted as saying, "It's a real reinvention. Me and David Self are working on the screenplay, and we're trying to do something new and fresh." MGM was full steam ahead. They wanted to make Robocop happen by any means necessary. They were so committed to the idea, in fact, they started making promotional material before any actors were cast or concept art was even created. In order to get positive buzz building about the film, they produced this poster for a licensing expo. However, things didn't go as smoothly as everyone was hoping with Aronofsky. He and the studio ran into conflict after conflict. One of the primary sticking points was the fact that the studio wanted to exploit the post-Avatar rise in 3D films, and Aronofsky was not enthusiastic about that prospect. They also apparently weren't in total agreement about Aronofsky's reimagining of everyone's favorite TJ Laser impersonator.
My son Jimmy watches this cop show, TJ Laser, and this laser guy does this every time he takes down a bad guy, so naturally my kid thinks every good cop should be.
And you don't want to disappoint?
The film was said to be set 3,000 years in the future, with humanity having lost the idea of morality, and the only way they could regain it was by learning from Robocop's protocols. Needless to say, this version of the Robocop remake faltered and eventually bit the dust due to the MGM bankruptcy in 2010. The studio just did not have the money to spend on the film, thus, Aronofsky went off to make Black Swan. By mid-2011, there was still no news about Aronofsky's Robocop, and MGM, now out of their legal quagmire, wanted to move quickly. They brought in Brazilian filmmaker Jose Padilla to fast-track the project. He was given the studio remit of producing a faithful, more conservative remake of the original Robocop story. MGM wanted to make sure they had the recognizable elements of a Robocop film in place before giving it a green light.
Any special message for all the kids watching at home?
Stay out of trouble.
They were so serious about making something that stayed true to the original feeling of Robocop, they brought back its creators and original screenwriters, Ed Neumeyer and Michael Miner. They worked, along with Quantum of Solace writer Joshua Zatumer, to build a contemporary version of the Robocop story. They incorporated a more Steve Jobsian take on the head of OCP and included vague allusions to the socio-political climate of the day, like half-baked jabs at Fox News, the war in Afghanistan, and the Patriot Act.
A majority of senators have voted in the affirmative. The Dreyfus Act has been repealed.
Despite trying to be faithful to the spirit of the original film by updating its targets to contemporary cultural elements, it does nothing to really differentiate itself. The film is being made in reaction to both the original Verhoeven film and its previous incarnation of the Big Swing version that Darren Aronofsky was trying to make. It's a movie that feels self-conscious. It lacks the energy and gonzo socio-political commentary to the degree that would really be honorific of Robocop. The socio-political overtones of the film are there because it's a Robocop movie, not because it actually has anything to say. Is the film all bad? No. Aside from Robocop himself, played by Joel Kinnaman, the cast is stellar. Sam Jackson, Michael Keaton, and a virtual army of interesting performers grace the screen. Jackie Earle Haley was hot off an Oscar nomination and his appearance in Watchmen, but like most of the other actors, he doesn't have enough to do. On paper, everything you want out of an epic Robocop adventure is there. Robotic suits, Ed 209, and an individual's search for identity. However, it doesn't have anything new to add to the cop-turned-robot god idea of the original film. The film is rated PG-13. This is another perfect example of why the film lacks the from-the-gut oomph the original has in spades. They don't really explore or push any of the new elements in the script. Take for example that you legally need to have a police officer with a human hand in order to be able to fire a gun in an altercation, something that's introduced early in the film.
That's why 72% of Americans will not stand for a robot pulling the trigger.
It could be used to explore the culpability of the individual soldier in the war on crime, how policing in a world of drone warfare and post-war on terror surveillance is being augmented and evolved in ways no one is expecting. How does that manifest in the finished film? Well, the killer police roboto guy doesn't wear a glove on his right hand, so you can see it's a human hand. Nothing about his human hand is even paid off in the climax of the film. If you set up in Act 1 that this invulnerable character has one element of his human body still remaining, it should probably be used as a weakness or factor into the climax of the story in some way, right? Jose Padilla has said repeatedly that he tried to expand the scope of the film, but the MGM execs in charge of the production were extremely risk-averse. Upon its release, the film was marginally financially successful, pulling in close to $250 million, but it was critically lambasted and not embraced by the fans of the franchise. At the time, the film was seen as a nadir of the mid-2000s remake trend. What many film fans viewed as the perfect movie in the original did not need a remake at all, let alone a clumsy PG-13 CGI fest. This is a perfect example of a ton of smart people from different creative disciplines getting together and attempting to recapture magic. Unfortunately, you just can't, especially when you're trying to both be your own thing and mimic one of the most successful action films of all time. That's just not how genuine inspiration works. Tragically, Robocop is now closer to the thing he was commenting on than a true vigilante fighting corporate greed like he was always intended to be. He's an asset on MGM's profit and loss sheets. And now with Amazon buying MGM, it's arguably the most bleak aspect of all of this. The real-world equivalent of OCP owns Alex Murphy. The Robocop remake failed because there's no good way to make a film under the pressure cooker of corporate surveillance and second-guessing. Robocop deserved better. There's plenty of room for new Robocop stories. He's a character that, while deeply rooted in the time period that he was created, is capable of being the protagonist of timeless stories that enthrall generations. Hopefully, next time Alex Murphy graces the silver screen, he'll have us all saying,
I'd buy that for $1.
This belongs to your grandson, Kal-El.
This is Krypton, the short-lived television show chronicling the adventures of Superman's grandfather on their home world. Originally airing for 2 seasons on the Sci-Fi Channel, the show attempted to use the sprawling mythology of the Man of Tomorrow's backstory to generate a Game of Thrones-like political drama that would springboard the network to previously unseen heights of popularity. The only problem is, it didn't.
They will all kneel before Zod.
Krypton follows Seg-El, the grandfather of Superman, who's confronted by a time-traveling Adam Strange and given a mission.
Where I'm from, your grandson becomes the greatest hero in the universe.
Presented with a red cape that's slowly disappearing into thin air, Strange informs Seg that someone is attempting to erase Superman from existence. The fate of the future now rests on Seg-El's uneasy shoulders.
Once this cape is gone, our time's up. And Superman will have been wiped from existence.
Initially, we follow Seg as he's embroiled in an arranged marriage to one of the ruling houses of Kandor, engaged in a romantic tryst with Lita Zod, a progenitor of future General Zod, and how he struggles with the fact that his grandfather, Val-El, was unjustly murdered by the ruling powers of Krypton. He believed that there was an alien life form out in the universe, and that it was coming to Krypton with the desire to consume everything.
Devouring these civilizations one by one.
Writing on his personal blog, co-creator David S. Goyer said, "While working on Man of Steel, I had a surfeit of backstory material that never made it into the finished film. After toying with the ideas for a few weeks, I pitched a concept for a Superman prequel series to WB Television, a kind of Romeo and Juliet in space with a little bit of Brave New World thrown in for good measure. And what would result is a story that's slightly less than enticing. For season 1, you can see the bones of what Goyer is talking about as far as a forbidden romance set against the backdrop of an oppressive government goes, and there's real potential. This could be something cool. The only problem is it just kinda isn't. The elements that aren't directly related to the Superman mythology are just a generic science fiction show. Scary authoritarian government, people being oppressed, and deeply religious oligarchy all are placed front and center. There's a doomsday prophecy, a tragic backstory, and every once in a while something that's visually arresting, like the costume for the voice of Rao or the Fortress of Solitude. But most of the time it feels like two different shows sandwiched together. You have generic guy fights the system show, and then you also have Please Remember This Is a Superman Show, the series, where every few episodes you have throwbacks to key Superman-esque archetypes, like the fact that Val-El wasn't believed by his compatriots and that he was shunned and ultimately thrown into the Phantom Zone, similar to how Jor-El wasn't believed by Kryptonians in his era. Similarly, Val-El also had a Fortress of Solitude, and that there's a holographic representation of him in there for Seg to talk to. It's all just, we're doing the things you're familiar with without ever breaking new ground.
So then we can change things.
No, you can't.
The overly complicated season 1 finale should be great. You got Brainiac, you got Zod, you got Val-El back to life, you got what should be an epic cliffhanger conclusion where it seems like all hope is lost and Seg-El has failed. And the Superman cape we've used for an anchor all season is now fully restored, only this time the House of Elcrest is replaced with the emblem for the House of Zod. On paper, it's great. In execution, they just don't really have the money to make it work, and most of the characters just feel flat and underdeveloped.
I'm not giving up. I'm not either.
After that conclusion of season 1, the ratings for Krypton weren't looking so good. When the show premiered on March 31st, 2018, it pulled in 1.32 million viewers domestically. For Sci-Fi, that was a hit. They were happy with that. However, by the time episode 10 aired on May 23rd, the show was down to an audience of around 500,000 people, diminished by more than half. Sci-Fi thought there was potential here though, and they greenlit the series for a second season.
Brainiac plunders the universe for one thing, knowledge. We have something he can never get his hands on. Knowledge of the future.
Debuting on June 12, 2019, the show failed to perform the way everyone would have wanted, launching with only 480,000 viewers. Picking up 6 months after the end of season 1, we're following Drew Zod ruling with an iron fist. Ultimately, season 2 has more money than it seemed season 1 had. The costumes feel better, and the show is now including other DC Comics characters like Lobo into the mix. They even utilized Doomsday in some pretty fun ways, but it was just too little too late.
Hey, buddy. Just you back here, as the rest of the Kiss Army over there behind it. Oh, he's a talker, ain't he?
Again, writing for his personal blog, Goyer says, "I think there was some good ideas in Krypton, but it really suffered from its crushingly restrictive budget limitations. Perhaps if we'd developed the show a few years later, when streaming was coming into its own, we might have found a larger audience and been given a proper budget." Would more money have fixed many of Krypton's issues? Yes, it would have helped significantly. However, there's still the problem that the show is neither fish nor fowl. It's not epic enough or filled with enough political intrigue to fully be science fiction Game of Thrones, and it's also not fully a Superman show, despite it having the protagonist who has a sad backstory, a Fortress of Solitude, and Superman crest plastered all over the place.
You think you are the Man of Steel? You are no Superman. You are nothing.
There's also not that much source material to draw from that Goyer and the other writers adapting the material can mine. Superman has a large and varied cast of villains and supporting characters, but most of them are either human or aliens that have come to Earth. They basically had two options when developing the show: make it all about the political intrigue on Krypton, or actually connect the show with the broader DC universe. And ultimately, they tried to do both and failed at each.
The only one person who's ever stopped Doomsday in the universe doesn't exist anymore.
The ending of the second season leaves things with tangible narrative threads leading towards an expansion of what the show could accomplish. The season 2 cliffhanger leaves Brainiac having adopted Jor-El as a baby and taking him to Earth, where he will be used to control Earth's population.
Once we reach our destination, you will be a god amongst men.
This is a pretty wild swing for a show that's theoretically an origin story for Superman's family line. Almost like they could feel the writing on the wall and knew what they were doing wasn't working, so they tried to do something unexpected. Only, at that point, no one was watching, so there was no one to get talking. Overall, Krypton isn't good enough to be memorable or terrible enough to be shocking. It sits in that sepia-toned, bland level of the cultural sediment that things like Dark Angel, Roswell, and Fringe are doomed to occupy. Shows that had real potential and a frustrating ineptitude simultaneously. Look no further than the aesthetic of the first season. It's just people in leather motorcycle jackets. That's not otherworldly or majestic enough to visually convey you are on an alien world.
What are you wearing? Is that guilt? Is that guilt?
Everything about Krypton feels like the worst version of "we're going to shoot in Vancouver." The sets are small in scale, the exteriors are just either forests or digitally enhanced sound stages. The characters, because the show is so intent on doing a serialized narrative, never really get the time to breathe or explore the inner lives of their personalities. Chief among these sins, though, is the way the show deals with Seg-El. Today, most people probably don't even remember that Krypton was produced, let alone that it was originally conceived as a tie-in backstory to the Henry Cavill version of Superman. It's a relic from a bygone era on multiple fronts, which is almost unfathomable because it came out in 2018. That's not so long ago.
Is that it?
Not even close.
That's not mine.
What's not yours?
The pen. I've never...
This is Tomorrowland, and it was supposed to be Disney's next big thing. The studio was setting the project up for success. They provided director-writer Brad Bird with a generous $170 million budget, George Clooney signed on to star, and Lost creator Damon Lindelof penned the script, which was intended to be a love letter to the retrofuturism of the 1950s. The film was looking like it would be a smash success. Then the movie came out and failed. Faster than you can say a magic pen that transports you to another world, the film flickered into obscurity. Which brings us to the inevitable question, why? Back in 2015, Disney was in full swing of their ascension into global dominance. Pixar's Inside Out and Avengers Age of Ultron were both released in that year, as well as a tiny little film called Star Wars: The Force Awakens.
I could show you the ways of the Force!
They were in the early stages of discussions to buy 20th Century Fox, and things seemed to be going pretty well for them. They began plans to cement their mid-decade catalog by kickstarting another live-action blockbuster franchise based on a theme park attraction. They'd made literally billions of dollars with the Pirates of the Caribbean, so why not try again?
Welcome to the Caribbean, life.
Or at least that's how Lindelof pitched it. He was looking to create new feature films that had original stories. While in a meeting with a development executive at Disney, he asked a simple question. Why haven't you guys turned more rides into film franchises? These discussions quickly snared Brad Bird, who was looking to take on another live-action project after the runaway success of Mission Impossible: Ghost Protocol.
Mission accomplished!
These talks quickly evolved into Tomorrowland, a throwback feature to the structure of Disney classics like Escape to Witch Mountain, with an updated and contemporary voice courtesy of Brad Bird, one of the most skilled and thoughtful directors currently working. Bird was so dedicated to the story, in fact, he turned down the chance to direct Star Wars: The Force Awakens in order to finish Tomorrowland. He was convinced that the world needed new stories, that originality was something that people wanted and needed in their lives. And Star Wars, while beloved, was something that could exist without his creative efforts. And so, Disney gave it the green light.
Well, you wanted to see Tomorrowland. Here it comes.
The story of Tomorrowland follows a young girl, a curmudgeonly scientist, and a teenage robot as they attempt to find a path from our world to a secret dimension only known as Tomorrowland. The movie is about returning to optimism in dark times, about the strength of human will. It's about how the only real defeat comes when you give up and choose not to fight for a better day. Timeless themes that have endured over centuries. The only issue is that the movie is boring. The picture feels cold and disinterested in its protagonists. It's supposed to be this story of the timeless struggle of being positive in the face of adversity, and how if we band together, we can solve even the most difficult issues. But the film is all shot in cold grays, with characters that never really seem to connect with each other.
Sooner or later, I'm gonna make you laugh.
For the first half hour or so, you're following a young boy at the World's Fair in the 1960s as he's trying to showcase a homemade rocket pack that he invented. Then, after his story completes, the movie starts again with a new protagonist in modern day. It's a lot to ask an audience to start a film twice. Even though this boy is later revealed to be George Clooney's Frank Walker, it doesn't make for a particularly cohesive viewing experience. And it's even more of a stretch to ask an audience to go on a MacGuffin chase where our characters are trying to fix something.
I'm sorry, what can I fix?
The way the story is structured, we follow Britt Robertson's Casey as she's trying to learn the secrets of a magic pin that appears to have a power to teleport her to an alternate universe, all the while attempting to avoid killer robots. The film lacks a clear and audience-understood goal for the characters. On a primal level, the film is about maintaining hope in the face of insurmountable odds. However, instead of giving our characters a goal that seems unattainable, it's just them running around from place to place. There's no thematic undergirding that requires optimism. We spend an hour and a half before they even get to Tomorrowland. Then another 17 minutes until we find out that the thing everyone is trying to fix is the planet itself. And the climax of the film, the big finale, is just our characters and the villain standing around in a room, monologuing to one another.
To save civilization, I would show its collapse.
For a film about the importance of acting in support of your beliefs, the action sure is minimal in this finale. To make things even worse, the movie you're watching isn't even the movie. It's George Clooney's Frank Walker telling the audience a story. This layer of narrative artifice causes yet another potential audience disengagement point because it makes it feel like the story isn't real. It's not the definitive events that transpired. It's one person's version of the events. Who's to say Frank's even a reliable narrator?
Do you want to tell this story?
No, you're doing fine.
Because if you think you could tell this story better, I would absolutely love to hear you try.
So was that the reason the movie failed? It wasn't very good? In part, yes, but additionally, Tomorrowland didn't have any marketing support whatsoever. It's bleak to admit this, but there weren't any Happy Meal toys or 80-ounce convenience store cups around reminding us that the film was coming out, and the trailers were almost non-existent. Sure, the vague, show-nothing approach to building hype had worked in the past for Lindelof, but this was supposed to be a family romp. If parents don't know what it is, how are they going to know to take their kids to it? Cloverfield had one of the most famously confusing marketing campaigns, which had interested moviegoers combing through the corners of the internet looking for clues. The Blair Witch Project also had some really unique marketing that drew audiences into the theater in droves. So it's not like a vague marketing campaign is necessarily a bad thing, but it can be the wrong thing. Cloverfield and the Blair Witch Project are horror movies that use the audience's lack of understanding as a way to drive the inherent scariness of the movies. With these films, the less you know, the better. Tomorrowland, on the other hand, is an all-ages adventure film. It's trying to be exciting, but you wouldn't know that if you saw the teaser trailer for the film. It just shows the main character running through a field and stumbling upon a futuristic-looking city.
No way.
This is hardly the thing that is going to make us lean over our friend's shoulder in the theater and casually whisper, "Ooh, that looks good." You'd think that a film being a big-budget, family-friendly sci-fi action epic with a star-studded cast would be something you'd want to lean into. Disney tends to really care about bringing their rides to life on the big screen, as it helps them justify remodels of old attractions so they can generate more foot traffic to their parks. This film wasn't about a single ride, it was about an entire quadrant of the park. It's a summer blockbuster that screams for fathers and daughters to sprint to movie theaters, but you'd never know that because Disney did very little to tell us about it. Tomorrowland is not a train wreck of a film. It's got fun ideas, impressive retro-futurist designs, and the bones of what could have been a great story. But it just misses the mark on a few too many key details. It feels like a project that was rushing to meet a deadline. Bird and Lindelof seem to be genuinely committed to trying to make the project the best it could be, and that could potentially be the issue at hand. The film had so many ideas and themes and characters that it never feels like it settles on the right ones and truly develops them. A lackluster marketing campaign doesn't make a lick of difference if your film is great. Maybe it means that the film will just take a while to pick up steam. Maybe it succeeds on video on demand due to word of mouth. There are plenty of ways for a film to build momentum if the quality is there. Unfortunately, Tomorrowland's biggest issue is that it just never really clicks into gear.
Someone once told me time is a flat circle. Everything we've ever done or will do, we're gonna do over and over and over again, forever.
If what Cole is saying is true, then we're all going to get to watch season 1 of True Detective over and over and over again. And that's just fine by us because it was nothing short of lightning in a bottle. The same, however, cannot be said of the show's second or even third seasons, which were, to put it kindly, not as good. It's a track record that's caused more than a few fans and critics to quite reasonably wonder, why is it impossible to make another good season of True Detective?
It's my bad, boys. Maybe we got started on the wrong foot there.
True Detective was a crime anthology series that debuted on HBO in January of 2014, but interest was sky high before the first episode even aired. That's because at a time when it was still pretty rare for major film actors to appear on TV, producers had managed to assemble a cast worthy of a major theatrical release, including Matthew McConaughey, Woody Harrelson, and Michelle Monaghan. Set in 2012, the first season follows the story of McConaughey's detective Rustin "Rust" Cole and Harrelson's Marty Hart. The two are Louisiana State Police homicide detectives who are reinvestigating the murder of a prostitute, which they had failed to solve 17 years earlier. Along the way, Hart struggles with his marital infidelity and Cole with his dark past. The series was subversive, compelling, and full of zeitgeist-worthy twists, making it an instant hit with both critics and audiences. Despite having an equally impressive cast that included cinematic stars like Vince Vaughn, Rachel McAdams, and Colin Farrell, True Detective Season 2 bombed hard with critics and fans. Season 3, which starred Mahershala Ali, was better received but still only captured a fraction of the first season's acclaim. In all fairness though, living up to the original is far from an easy task because True Detective Season 1 was that rare example of a show that fired on all cylinders. For starters, the writing was absolutely incredible. Created and penned entirely by author and rookie television scribe Nick Pizzolatto, the show grew out of material he had originally developed to be a novel. It was only after working the story out that the writer decided it had visual elements that made it a better fit for television. The scripts were also full of memorable, quotable dialogue, especially for Cole, who got to spit out gems like,
"So death created time to grow the things that it would kill."
Cynical and pessimistic, the character served as a vehicle for the show's religious and existential themes, and McConaughey's performance is also cited as a highlight of the entire series. The actor at the time was mostly famous for appearing in romantic comedies like The Wedding Planner, How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, and Failure to Launch, and was only really beginning to break through as a dramatic star in films like Dallas Buyers Club and Interstellar. Off-screen, he was known for his quirky personality, weird catchphrases,
All right.
That's amazing.
and odd metaphysical beliefs, so the part of Cole seemed tailor-made for him. Long-time best friends and possibly even half-brothers, McConaughey and Harrelson's real-life relationship brought a naturalness to their on-screen interactions that likely couldn't have been achieved with just any two actors. They knew exactly how to elevate each other's performances, and everything about their dynamic felt real.
You know, you can't just slide into my life creating tensions,
What, I make
judging
you
me.
tap some bimbo? Looks like a young Maggie. I make you flaunt that shit.
Obviously, a great deal of credit for that, and for the success of the first season in general, has to go to director Cary Joji Fukunaga, who helmed every episode. Fukunaga not only knew how to get the best out of his actors, but was careful to make sure the show's visual style was always as interesting as its story. In the director's own words, "In every episode, I wanted to at least try to find specific moments in which you could treat the visual side of the medium with the same importance as we were treating the dialogue." The most famous example of the director's efforts has to be a now iconic 6-minute tracking shot in episode 4. Who Goes There? The scene finds Rust in a particularly brutal shootout. The unbroken shot, which weaves about the scene following different parts of the action, traps the audience in the moment with him, maximizing the intensity of the fight. Fukunaga's visual style was as much a part of True Detective's identity and success as Pizzolatto's writing, and McConaughey and Harrelson's performances, so it's not completely surprising that the second season, which lacked all of those things, was a disappointment. One of the reasons anthology shows like True Detective are relatively rare is because once a series finds a set of characters and situations an audience likes, starting from scratch is always a risk.
But the problems with True Detective Season 2 actually went much deeper. While Season 1 was allowed as long as it needed to be developed, production on the second season was rushed to meet a predetermined release date. That meant Pizzolatto had far less time to work out a story. HBO president of programming at the time, Michael Lombardo, would later take the blame, saying, "When we tell somebody to hit an air date as opposed to allowing the writing to find its own natural resting place when it's ready, we failed." Not helping was that despite an executive producer title, Fukunaga apparently had little to nothing to do with the production of Season 2. After creatively clashing with Pizzolatto on the first season, Fukunaga, who was never slated to return as director due to the anthology nature of the show, was essentially shut out of the creative process. The director would later explain, "My involvement in the second season was as much or as little as they needed me, and turns out they didn't need me." Instead of being replaced by another auteur feature director in Season 2, as was originally planned, Fukunaga was replaced by several directors. That left Pizzolatto as the sole driving creative force of True Detective. But while Pizzolatto is no doubt talented, more than a few insiders and critics have suggested that his partnership with Fukunaga tempered some of the writer's less useful creative instincts, and the success of Season 1 was the result of the unique push and pull of their clashing sensibilities. After the failure of Season 2, HBO would insist that Pizzolatto work with a counterpart who could bring some creative balance back to the show, and that person turned out to be Deadwood creator and showrunner David Milch. They also allowed it more development time, and the third season wouldn't drop for almost 4 years after the second. While some critics complained Season 3 lacked some of the original season's intriguing strangeness, it was generally considered a return to form for the show. Audiences, however, weren't tuning in, and the season averaged just over 1.2 million viewers per episode, which was less than half as many as either of the previous seasons. It's possible that a great deal of the first season's appeal was how new and surprising it all was. It's also possible that fans just fell in love with Rust and Marty, the vibe of the first case, and we're just never going to be as excited about anything else, short of possibly a direct sequel with the same characters and creative team.
I keep things even, separate. Like the way I can have just one beer without needing 20.
Or, as some commentators have suggested, it's possible that a lot of what was so memorable about Season 1 was actually plagiarized from other writers. For example, Pizzolatto has been accused of stealing some of Cole's best lines from the work of horror writer Thomas Ligotti, whose influence on Cole's worldview Pizzolatto has explicitly acknowledged. Others have pointed out that the first season's story, structure, and themes seem to borrow elements from Alan Moore and Eddie Campbell's seminal comic book series From Hell. Pizzolatto is on the record as being a fan of Moore, and the final conversation between Cole and Hart seems to be a direct reference to a scene from an issue of yet another Moore-penned comic series called Top 10.
It's just one story. The oldest. Light versus dark.
In all fairness to Pizzolatto, many of the claimed similarities are easily dismissed as influence. Whether he's capable of delivering another Season 1 quality installment of True Detective without standing on the shoulders of giants like Ligotti and Moore remains an open question. Whatever the answer is, it is unlikely to affect the future of the franchise. That's because the show's fourth season, True Detective Night Country, is not the creative brainchild of Pizzolatto. The season will instead be headed by producers Issa Lopez and Barry Jenkins. Pizzolatto remains credited as an executive producer on the series, but right now, it's unclear how much creative involvement, if any, he had. Maybe the new team will get it right, or maybe Rust was right. Time is a flat circle, and we're just doomed to get disappointing season after disappointing season of True Detective for the rest of eternity.
Crush your enemies, see them driven before you, and hear the lamentation of their women.
This is Conan the Barbarian, and unfortunately, so is this. And then there's also this movie.
You remember me?
Who are you?
I'm the one who made you pretty.
Since the meteoric rise of Conan in the 80s, there's been repeated attempts at resurrecting the barbarian who would be king. And yet, they've all failed in one way or another.
I live, I love, I slay, and I am content.
First appearing in the Weird Tales magazine short story People of the Dark from 1931, it wasn't until the reprints of the Robert E. Howard novels with Frank Frazetta cover paintings and the Roy Thomas Marvel comics that Conan truly reached cultural prominence. Off the back of these two creative sojourns, John Milius and Oliver Stone wrote a film adaptation. The feature was positioned to copy James Bond, launch a franchise and adapt one book a year until you run out of books. In fact, the first film ends with a coda, a flash forward of an older King Conan. However, the would-be franchise was over before it could start. 82's Conan the Barbarian was a commercial and critical success, but without John Milius returning to the director's chair, the follow-up, Conan the Destroyer, lost its way and ended up in the much more fantastical and comedic tone that bombed both commercially and critically. The next film that would attempt to capitalize off the Conan novels was Red Sonja, starring Brigitte Nielsen, and which featured Arnold Schwarzenegger in a definitely not Conan role. He was originally intended to play his iconic barbarian in a cameo, but just before filming, the producers lost the rights. Thus, when Arnold showed up on set, his character had been renamed Calidor. The underhanded approach to filming permanently fractured Schwarzenegger's relationship with producer Dino De Laurentiis, and to add insult to injury, Red Sonja was the biggest bomb of the franchise. And thus, the legacy of Conan languished and would never fully recover. During the late 90s, there was an attempt at mounting a King Conan film, titled King Conan: Crown of Iron, but it folded due to Schwarzenegger's 2003 gubernatorial victory. After this, a revolving door of big-name directors attempted to take on the prospect of a new Conan film, including a returning Milius, the Wachowskis, and Robert Rodriguez. However, the rights eventually ended up at Millennium Films. After attaching Vin Diesel as the star and Brett Ratner as the director, the project quickly began taking shape. However, Ratner would leave over budgetary concerns, and Diesel would bow out to star in more Fast and Furious films.
You don't turn your back on family.
And it was here that Millennium decided to take a big swing. They needed to get the picture into production before their rights lapsed, so they hired Marcus Nispel in June of 2009. The director of the Texas Chainsaw remake and Pathfinder seemed like a great person to take over the project. With a keen visual sensibility and a penchant for grounded fantasy, he seemed to be a shoo-in. However, Marcus Nispel would be the misstep that would simultaneously get the film greenlit and also doom it to the Walmart $5 DVD bins. The story for this version of Conan the Barbarian features one part Conan origin story and one part a mythically infused, we've got to go collect a bunch of items, video game movie plot. We follow Jason Momoa, who was primarily known as the actor from Stargate and Baywatch at this time, as Conan, and a well-cast but underwritten supporting ensemble that includes Stephen Lang, Rose McGowan, and Rachel Nichols, as they all vie for control of a mythical mask that had been broken into multiple pieces. That doesn't sound too bad, right? That sounds like a solid cast and a tropey fun adventure movie plot. Conan doesn't need to be Shakespeare after all. Only problem is, the film is kind of a mess, and the main problem is Jason Momoa. While Jason Momoa is currently a popular megastar with charisma for days, in this film, he's one note, and that note is not very Conan.
Then what?
I want your head.
Ironically, if the Jason Momoa of today could travel back in time and replace himself in this movie, he'd make a great Conan. But the guy who's in this movie just kinda says things in a low, whispery voice and then shouts stuff when it seems appropriate.
Prisoners of Masantia! The key to your freedom sits in your captain's gut.
And also, why can't people say Conan correctly in this film?
Conan! Conan, please!
Conan left Samaria.
It's Conan. This really shouldn't be that hard. He's the titular character. Many of the problems with the film lead back directly to the director, Marcus Nispel. The tone of the movie is basically just a living tribal tattoo, which isn't really the vibe you want from a Conan movie. It's so self-conscious about being a grounded, plausible reality with fantastic elements in it that it almost feels ashamed by the otherworldly things in the picture. Additionally, multiple sources connected with the film have suggested that Nispel has a keenly visual mind but had no story sense, which caused the film to capsize as they were making it. When watching the movie, you might notice that all the scenes don't seem to flow into each other. They feel like separate and distinct sequences that then stop, and then we pick up with our characters later, in other places. Well, that's because as they were making the film, Nispel started to change the story as they went. The first act is roughly what the script intended, primarily because the film set in Bulgaria had already been constructed. This is all the Conan as a young man, his origin sequence, up to about when his village is attacked and his father is killed by Stephen Lang's highly forgettable villain. However, as the shooting progressed, Nispel invented new locations, scenes, and set pieces. He was constantly battling with the producers of the project over how the story was unfolding, and his main solution was to just add sequences and elements to what they were creating.
This problem got so bad that apparently the film's co-screenwriter, Sean Hood, was flown out to Bulgaria in order to work day and night to attempt to write new pages utilizing Nispel's ideas. This led the whole film to have a jolting, stopping, and starting rhythm to it. Upon release, Conan the Barbarian was a flop. It only made $10 million opening weekend, and it only pulled in roughly $48 million during its entire theatrical run, which isn't even half of the film's purported $90 million budget. Unfortunately for everyone involved, Jason Momoa would not be anointed King Conan. We all know what happened next, though. Momoa would go on to play another very Conan-esque role as Khal Drogo in Game of Thrones, which proved to be his breakout part.
Daddy, please!
Crown for king.
Since the release of 2011's Conan, there have been a considerable number of attempts at getting Conan or Conan spin-off characters into their own movies. A Thulsa Doom project headed by Jaimin Hansu, a Red Sonja picture starring Amber Heard, a Conan TV project, and a Red Sonja film starring Rose McGowan that made it far enough along that it got a teaser poster released at Comic-Con. However, the greatest Conan film almost produced was Legend of Conan, a revisitation of that long-dangling idea of Arnold returning to the role of Conan for a King Conan story. In October of 2012, just a mere year after the release of Conan the Barbarian, Deadline reported that Universal Pictures had struck a deal for Arnold to return to the role for what would be the final Conan film in the original franchise. What wasn't made public at the time of the Deadline press release was that the story for Legend of Conan would be loosely based on the novel Legend, written by British writer David Gemmell and published in 1984. The story follows an aging barbarian king who must defend his kingdom one last time after discovering there are hordes of outlanders attempting to invade his domain. Slowly, the film started to lose momentum over the 4 years that Universal had the rights to the project. Various producers that were attached to the project were called away to work on higher-profile projects, and everything stalled. The death knell for the script was when Universal president Jeff Kirschenbaum left the company, and none of the other execs picked it up. It floundered in the studio's sea of projects. Ultimately, Conan continues to be a highly commercial and successful franchise, but the goal of a movie franchise has eluded him. It's just failure and false starts one after another. Is this due to the fact that the first film was so fantastic, or that Arnold in the role is so iconic, or that it's just really hard to find big bodybuilders who can act? Maybe. Or maybe it's just the simple fact that all the other attempts at staging more Conan have overlooked what made the Howard stories work in the first place. He's a barbarian, yes. Sometimes he's heroic, but the character of Conan is flawed, brutal, and complex. Something none of the attempted film adaptations want to touch with a 10-foot pole for some reason.